Welcome to Kids Matter. I'm Dr. Elisa Minkin. As a pediatrician, mom, and grandma, I understand how challenging it can be to help our kids grow into their best selves. We are so much more powerful together. Here, I will be sharing the knowledge and wisdom of a wide range of people who understand and care deeply about children. I'm hoping for your input as well because kids really do matter. They are our future.
So I am so honored and excited to be speaking with Dr. Flo Rosen, a retired pediatrician and grandma better known as Dr. Bubby of Ask Bubby. After an adorable clip with her 8-day-old grandson precociously rolling over went viral with over 30 million views, her daughter-in-law encouraged her to start her own social media platform. She now shares science-based advice and parenting tips with hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I have to say, my oldest daughter told me about you. She's like, Mom, there's another Dr. Bubby. Because I'm Dr. Bubby in the family whenever they want my medical advice, should they choose to take it.
Yeah.
Not as often as I'd like.
Right. Well, that's a given.
I know. We're going to get to that. Why they should listen to us. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
We should listen to them. But anyway, we'll get to that. So as Bubbies, which in case you don't know is the Yiddish word for grandma, and pediatricians, we have so much to schmooze or chat about. Welcome, Dr. Rosen.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
I have been waiting for this, as you know, for a very long time, very patiently. So I'm really, really excited. So I want to start with, as a pediatrician and grandma influencer, all right? I feel like you have your finger on the pulse of today's parents. What's it like being a new parent in 2025/26? Because Happy New Year.
Same to you. I think being a new parent today is absolutely terrifying. And the reason why I say that is this generation really gets their information differently than we did. We read books. We read Penelope Leach. We read, other books and talked to our pediatrician and, read magazine articles in Parents. And, we took what was important to us. This generation is really getting information very, very differently. They're going online and they're asking questions online. Plus, they're getting fed different videos based on an algorithm that nobody understands. So they're having information just bombarding them. And the information is frequently conflicting. Most of it is not science-based. There are lots of influencers out there that have no scientific background. And I think parents' heads are literally just whipping back and forth because they read something and they say, okay, that makes sense. And then all of a sudden they're fed 5 videos that say the exact opposite. So I think parents are truly, truly overwhelmed with information overload and they have no idea who or what's right. And I think it's just causing decision paralysis and tremendous lack of self-confidence.
I think so. And I don't know if you've seen a change since COVID.
I don't know in the sense that I wasn't doing this during COVID. I just started this, 2 years ago when Trent was born. And quite frankly, I wasn't involved in social media at all. I wasn't even on Facebook. So this is all a brave new world to me.
That's fair. Well, I worked until recently as a pediatrician. You retired a few years ago, correct?
3 years ago.
Yeah, after working for over 40 years, correct?
42.
Yeah, more than me, but we have a lot together. So I'm excited to join forces with you today. But I did work through COVID and in the post-pandemic period. And what I saw is a tremendous rise in distrust of the mainstream. So it's not just that there are so many people on social media that are not physicians or other, trustworthy healthcare professionals, but that people don't trust us as much anymore.
No, I think, that's absolutely true. There's no question about that. But what I find really difficult to get my head around and just really challenging to understand is that people that have this distrust point to COVID as proof of why they have that distrust. that they feel the messaging was wrong, that people lied to them. And I think it shows a huge misunderstanding of how science works. Could they have done better? Absolutely. Could the messaging have been clearer? Yes. Could they have stratified it more by age group and circumstance? Absolutely. But we were so overwhelmed by this horrific pandemic that I think public health officials really chose to do the easiest, simplest messaging just to get the word out to as many people as they possibly could. And when information came in that changed, they changed the messaging. That's how science works. You learn new things and that changes what you think. But I think it's been interpreted as so much lying. And I honestly think they were mistakes. They were legitimate mistakes. Some of the distancing, closing schools, different approaches that different countries took. We now know better. But I think to think that it was deliberately misleading the public and really touting the wrong thing is just incorrect. Millions of lives were saved by those vaccines. And I think a lot of the social distancing and a lot of the recommendations also help save lives. And the studies are coming out now that show that, comparing different scenarios. So I feel badly that what I think was absolutely brilliant in terms of coming up with how to treat somebody with severe, figuring out that they need to lie prone when they're, to avoid ventilation. All of those things. I mean, I really applaud our colleagues that figured all that out. And to point to all of that as a reason why you shouldn't believe in science just seems so backwards to me.
I have a different viewpoint.
Okay.
You have the compassionate viewpoint towards our public health leaders, and I agree with you. I think you're not wrong, but I want to give the opposite viewpoint because I'm what I call an autism mom. I have an adult daughter on the autism spectrum, and I see this through the layperson's eyes as well. I can understand where they're coming from. The whole anti-vaccine movement is something that I was impacted by too. And no, vaccines don't cause autism. I know that. But I can understand the rampant distrust. Part of it is the politicization and polarization that is part of our world that makes it so hard to be a parent, has taken COVID and used it as great fertilizer for what we call the outrage machine.
I think that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a piece of it, is that's the world that we're living in. And it's become very, very politicized, which medicine and science should never be politicized. But I feel like it pulled the curtain back to show us just how politicized and polarized medicine and science have become. In other words, you say that they adjusted as the information came in, but no, there was a political bias to how things were done. Even when it wasn't we weren't in crisis anymore, they were still not nuancing the recommendations, say, for the COVID vaccine.
No, I disagree that I would have preferred nuancing. And I think, unfortunately, as I said, the decision was made just to get it out as simply as possible to impact as many people. I don't think that was correct. Oh, no, I agree with you. But what I'm saying is I don't think it was a deliberate, malevolent attempt to mislead.
Right.
I think they did it with the best of intentions, which have been proven wrong in some cases. But I don't think it was malevolent. And what bothers me is it's pointed to as, see, they deliberately lied to us. They deliberately made us do things. And I don't think that's fair.
It isn't, but that's what the polarization is, right? That's how the algorithm works. You mentioned that we don't know how the algorithm works. Oh, yes, we do. All right. It's elevates things that make you get more outrage. The more you get upset, the more you engage. Yes. And that has inflamed it. But I'm not saying what they did at the time. I think they did the best they could with the tools they had at the time. I really do think so. But what I was waiting for after didn't happen. Instead, they doubled down. For example, when the COVID threat wasn't as great, why weren't they then giving more nuanced information? And they didn't.
I think that was a mistake.
Yes.
I think they should have at that point. I agree.
At that point. And I think that's where the pain comes in.
But I think the distrust isn't from that. I think the distrust is from the very, very beginning.
Mhm.
I think starting with how did the outbreak happen?
Right.
Conspiracy theories or, truth. I mean, nobody has a definitive answer right now. And there's evidence for lots of different things. But I just think from the very beginning, people, this whole thing about how COVID was handled set up a real dichotomy. People that felt they were being lied to, that there wasn't even a pandemic, that it wasn't as dangerous as people thought, that the vaccines, were really harmful, versus people, quite honestly, like me, who are in awe that they were able to develop treatments and a vaccine in the short period of time that they did. And I think just going right to the very beginning of that directly led to where we are now.
I agree. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I just, first of all, there was so much distrust, polarization, and politicization before, right? We weren't in a good place before, but I would have liked to have seen more humility afterwards and more Monday morning quarterbacking, really honest and saying what we did wrong and we're going to do it better. And I don't see that happening. I see doubling down. So I just have empathy for the other side. I really do understand it. And I think to build trust again, I don't know how we're going to do it because unfortunately we're in a very bad situation now with public health. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm so upset.
I have to say, it's not that I lack empathy
Right.
for certainly for parents right now,
Right.
because I think it is overwhelming hearing so many conflicting opinions. And you really start questioning who can you trust.
Exactly.
So I absolutely understand where parents are, but I have to say, even though I've gotten vilified for this before, and I'm sure I will again,
We both will.
if if you look statistically at the numbers and you compare studies across all continents and all countries, there is absolutely no doubt, none statistically, that vaccines save lives. Vaccines reduce illness, vaccines reduce hospitalizations, vaccines reduce deaths. That is unquestionable. And given how many millions and millions and millions of shots have been given across all different populations, the statistics support how safe it is. Now, that doesn't mean that people haven't been vaccine harmed. They have. And God forbid it were my child or my grandchild, I would be terrified, angry, upset. I don't disagree with any of that. And yes, there have been people harmed by vaccines. But when you look at the numbers are so minuscule in terms of the number of shots given. And even if you say that VAERS reporting is absolutely underreported, which it is because self-reporting always is underreported, the truth is the statistics are just overwhelming. So that doesn't mean that an individual person might not be harmed by a vaccine. But if you look at populations across the world, vaccines have been shown to be safe and to be beneficial. And I just think that that's the message that really needs to be shared. I mean, it needs to be shouted from the rooftops. And it just is very sad to me that, particularly because of social media, that message is really getting lost on lots of new parents because they're scared.
Right.
And I understand their fear.
Right. And they're scared because it's also the way we think as human beings. We're not scientists. Even if we're trained, by the way, as a scientist, we're still a human being. We're still a parent first. It's such a vulnerable position. And if we hear a story that something happened to our neighbor from a vaccine, that's going to outweigh anything a pediatrician says.
You know what? I think that's true. But I will say the flip side. Back in the days of the dinosaurs, when I was a resident, H flu, Haemophilus influenza, which was a bacteria, not a flu, just so our listeners know, was rampant. And it caused absolutely horrific disease, disability, and death. And I trained at CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and we had these 12-bed wards, and every bed was filled with somebody with H flu disease. And they all left the hospital dead, deaf, or missing a limb. It was horrific. I can't tell you how many transports I did because of fear of epiglottitis. Pediatricians today have heard the word. They've never seen a case. They haven't seen a case in well over 30, 35 years because the Hib vaccine came out. And I will tell you, when that vaccine came out, I couldn't wait for my kid to be old enough to get it. I just about ran to my pediatrician's office. And in my own lifetime, I have seen what vaccines can do. And my mother-in-law suffered from polio. I mean, I just seeing the diseases and seeing them now, some of them wiped out because of what we've been able to do, just overwhelmingly reinforces the benefit of vaccines to me. And yes, if you hear a horror story, it makes you frightened. I understand that. I mean, look, I remember when my kids were little, we lived in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia had fluoridated water. When we moved to New Jersey, we didn't have fluoridated water, and I had to give my kids fluoride pills. And every time
Sorry, it has fluoride now, but
fluoride
yeah,
tablets.
fluoride now.
Yeah. And I just remember it was like, I knew it was safe. I had prescribed it thousands of times. I had read studies upon studies, but every time I handed my kids one of those little fluoride pills, you had that little twinge in your brain saying, what if they find out it's not okay?
Well,
So
actually,
I
don't mean,
understand it.
yeah, I don't mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but there is
Yeah.
a lot of talk now about potential risks of fluoride. And it is a very hot topic. It
Again,
definitely aligns with the anti-vaccine movement, right? But anything we do, we're going to have to balance the risks and benefits, and science means we keep learning.
yeah, but I think if you're talking about the risks and benefits of fluoride, if you look at the studies and really parse what they're saying, the studies that say that they have seen a decrease of up to 5 IQ points in kids that take fluoride, some of those studies did not stratify how much fluoride the kids were exposed to. And when you look at the studies that stratify fluoride at the levels at which municipal water is fluoridated in the areas that still fluoridate do not show a decrease in IQ. In areas where there's very high naturally occurring fluoride, they do see some differences. So the question is really the amount of fluoride, and the studies haven't really, that have looked at that have really not publicized nearly as much as the headline saying fluoride causes you, to lose some IQ points. And the flip side is because of all of this outrage over fluoride, and I think it was somewhere in Ontario. I do not remember what city it was, but a city in Canada stopped fluoridating. And within 5 years, they went back to fluoridating because the amount of severe dental caries skyrocketed so high that the harm from not fluoridating was so great that they really had to reverse their stance. And that's not publicized enough.
Right. I practiced on Long Island where there is no fluoride in the water, and see so much dental decay and so much problems, and kids having to undergo anesthesia and to get dental work. It's
Yeah.
what we need to do is we need to teach people how to do risk benefit assessment, how
Well,
to
that's the
understand
key.
how science works. Like, unfortunately, we don't teach them.
Well,
Such a
but I
valuable.
think though what we've really lost is if you trust your pediatrician, then you trust your pediatrician to explain the risk benefit ratio and why it's important that they recommend something. The problem is that trust is gone now.
Exactly.
So
Bingo.
again, who do you believe?
Right. And it's so hard. Back to analysis paralysis. It's so hard. But by the way, you could choose fluoride topical. Just saying. You can choose fluoride topical as an option instead of ingesting fluoride. Intentionally.
It's true that topical fluoride can be very effective, if not, as or more effective. And the ADA actually now recommends that, and they no longer recommend, giving oral fluoride. So I think that's, a really beneficial kind of compromise that I think could really work well. But I will say what I disagree with is the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, is really an incredible advocate for kids. Not necessarily for pediatricians, because I think pediatricians in practice, if they did every single thing the AAP says they should be doing, a visit with the child would be 3 hours long, not 15 minutes. And the idea that all pediatricians should be providing fluoride varnishes in their office and doing some of that is just not practical.
It's ivory tower. A lot of, unfortunately, what they've been saying is
Yeah.
ivory tower at this point, which feeds into the perfect
Absolutely.
parenting problem. But we can get back to that later.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's positive things from social media?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, positively. I think, what I see, particularly on Instagram with my Ask Bubby account, is that I think it really has become a community. And I think that parents and grandparents really help each other on it. It doesn't mean they always agree with what I say, but there's always great conversation around it. And I've learned a lot from that. And I think if this old dog can learn something, it means maybe other people can as well. So I think there really is a lot of benefit to social media, but if it's used appropriately and understood, and parents, know how to vet how trustworthy a source is. And that's a very difficult challenge.
It is, because I think you can direct the algorithm by choosing wisely, but it still comes to you, the really nasty stuff, because it's just rising up
It
there. It
does.
just leaks in, and hard not to get distracted by all these provocative posts. But you're right. Your people are awesome people, by the way. I'm one of your biggest fans, and I love reading the
Thank
comments.
you.
I love the
Yeah.
comments. I love that you're saying you can learn from others. And that, by the way, we are supposed to now be collaborative. We are not, I think that, you trained in the era where the pediatrician was the patriarchal or matriarchal, right? No?
I have to cut you off there.
Okay.
Yes, that did exist. It absolutely existed. And quite honestly, I was persona non grata because my clinic attending, certainly as a resident, expected that he would be my kid's pediatrician. And he was a wonderful guy, very experienced, but very paternalistic. And
Oh, that's right.
even
Sorry.
back,
Paternal, not
and
patriarchal.
yeah, but even back then, that didn't fly with me. So I really chose a different pediatrician. And because I wouldn't want someone paternalistic as my pediatrician, my approach to pediatrics was never that approach. I always viewed it as collaborative. And I think starting in practice with young kids, my young kids, made a very big difference because I was kind of the same age as
Right.
lots of my parents. And so we kind of grew up together. And I think that that was really, really helpful. But I think it is true that the old view, not just of pediatricians, but physicians in general, were they were very paternalistic. They were very godlike. This is how you do it, period. And I think that that has really, really changed.
Right.
And I think social media has really provided, not even social media so much, the internet has actually leveled the playing field because parents were able to then look up things on their own. And they would come in to me, and yes, I joke it was Dr. Google, but they would come in with pages and pages and pages and say, well, I was reading and it says this. What do you think about that? And we'd have a very collaborative discussion about it. So I actually welcomed that. I thought that was a great, very positive movement to have parents be much more involved in, kind of shaping their kids, medical kind of journey.
Right. I didn't mean you, by the way.
I know it's
Sorry.
okay, but no, but I really do think it changed with the advent of the internet.
I think that there's a positive way, but it's also, first of all, parents have to be realistic. And unfortunately, pediatrics, this could be a whole separate podcast of how pediatrics has changed. We do not have time for reams of paper and all this discussion. It's sad because if we had more time, we could have more of that collaboration, but we don't. That's a huge problem.
I
But I just want to say one more thing. Sorry, I want to say one more thing. The bigger problem is not the lack of time. The bigger problem is two things. The lack of trust, so that I'm not just coming in to collaborate with you. I'm coming in to tell you and also more of the change of calling us providers and what I call it the have it your way Burger King model of medicine, where they're coming and telling you what to do. And see, that's very different than a true collaborative. I'm all for collaboration, but collaboration means we're working on it together, and I bring my expertise of medicine to the table, and you bring your expertise of your child to the table, and maybe whatever else you've looked up, right?
Yeah, but I I have to say, when it comes to time, I I'm a very old-fashioned pediatrician. I really made an effort to give my patients all the time they needed, which meant I frequently ran late. And my patients knew that. And I would say if they got upset because I was coming into their room late and they were waiting, I would apologize, but I'd say it was because the patient before you really needed my time. And if you ever need my time, I will be giving it to you as well. And I think patients really appreciated that. And I do think that that's much harder now, particularly in the age of private equity
Right.
and, a lot of pressure to kind of turn over, patients quickly. But I still think it's very important to give patients the time that they need. And as for patients coming in and telling me what to do, that really wasn't my experience. They would come in and maybe say, look, I'm worried that my kid might have this. And then I would look at what they're handing me and I'd say, well, I understand why Dr. Google says that, but here's the reasons why I don't think that's what you should be worried about. And then with my years of experience and, pediatric expertise, I would explain what was different about their child from what they were reading online. And I think being able to take that time and do that explanation really earned me a lot of trust and goodwill. But again, I haven't practiced in 3 years, and I think things have radically gone downhill in 3 years. So I may be talking very old school.
You were a fantastic pediatrician, and I know from your followers how much those who went to you loved you. So I have no
Well, I
doubt.
love them.
I
And
know.
hearing from them is wonderful.
I know, but you're being honest, and I'm glad you're being honest because just as when the AAP is ivory tower and removed from reality, I want to give every pediatrician out there a big hug. Give them a hug right now.
Yeah,
I just did to my
absolutely.
granddaughter's pediatrician because I want to do a Barbie style monologue. Maybe I'll do it for Instagram about how hard it is. If you watch the Barbie movie with America Ferrera saying how
Yeah.
hard it is to be a woman nowadays.
Yep.
We need that for parents and we need that for pediatricians. So it's such moral injury when we know and we really care and we can't do it. And then we're getting flack from the anti-vaccine, et cetera. So I want to move into the pressure to be the perfect parent. That was not a very delicate segue. I want to talk about that because we could talk. I could go on and on about my moral injury as a pediatrician. It's
Yeah.
not going to help parents out there. But for all you pediatricians listening, big hugs.
Absolutely. I think the pressure to be the perfect parent is overwhelming now. And again, it's because you look at everything that people are posting online. I mean, even things as simple as curating the perfect holiday, the perfect vacation. I think what parents need to realize is those moments when your kid is melting down and you finally lose it and, say something you regret because you raise your voice or, whatever it is, those moments aren't being the ones that are being posted on social media. So everything that parents are seeing is this beautifully curated world, which isn't reality 24/7. And I think it makes it very hard because parents look at that and say, why isn't my day like that? Why isn't my kid behaving like that? Look, I can tell you, there is somebody that posted about an 11-month-old girl that was eating perfectly with utensils. And I mean perfectly, sitting in her high chair, eating beautifully. Trent is 2.5, and you hand him a fork and he flings it across the table. Utensils are not in his wheelhouse right now. And,
Normal.
it's, yeah, but my daughter in law sees this 11-month-old and it's like, why isn't Trent using utensils? So, and it's understandable. So I think what you see online is just so far removed from the average person's reality. And it creates this really unfair set of expectations for every parent to live up to that. And it's not doable. It's not sustainable.
Really isn't. And that's a great segue into gentle parenting, because not only are they giving you
Can I
unrealistic,
groan?
you can make audible moan, groan, you can do whatever you want, but we need to talk about it, because it's not just the, aspirational parenting stuff about the beautiful home and the clothes and the this and the that. It is the expectation that you are constantly, you know, managing your child's emotions and making sure that everything is perfect. And when you melt down, it is such a huge failure because, you didn't co-regulate properly.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, gentle parenting in its absolute, truthful way is wonderful. It really just means treating your child with empathy and respect. And if they're upset about something, taking the time to sit with them, talk with them about it, and help them work through their emotions. Well, that's a fantastic way to parent. And I think that that's what every parent really should strive for, as opposed to the 50s authoritarian way, which is, you do it because I said so. I mean, using swats on the tush and, this you do it my way without explaining anything is a terrible way to parent. So I understand that the entire kind of abreaction is the opposite way, and to really, treat your child respectfully. I have no problem with that. What I have an issue with is that unfortunately, this generation has really misinterpreted gentle parenting. And they have interpreted gentle parenting in a way that they don't set limits, they don't say no because that would upset their child, and they try to really talk about all of their kids' feelings while the kid may be in the middle of a meltdown, which is absolutely not the time where your child is going to listen to a word you're saying. And anytime I have said that, parents that gentle parent get up in arms and they say, that's not gentle parenting. But the truth is, that's the majority of people that are attempting gentle parenting. And unfortunately, they are left in a state of feeling like a constant failure because they have to control their own emotions and never show their child that they're frustrated or angry or annoyed or anxious, and also help their child to control all their feelings. So if their child is having a bad moment, they take it very personally that they did something wrong, that they're not helping their child with this, and they're left in a constant state of feeling that they've failed. It is a terrible way to parent. I think treating your child with empathy and respect is a fabulous way to parent, but not the way it's being implemented.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that one of the problems is that we're so focused on what we have to do to help our children, we're not focused enough on our own emotional needs.
Well, we ignore it. If you're gentle parenting, you ignore your own.
That's not the way responsive parenting is supposed to be. The problem is that part of the message gets lost.
Yeah,
For some
it
reason,
does.
I don't know why. Maybe because on Instagram it's aspirational and they're not showing the struggle.
You know, I think that's probably true. They certainly don't want to say to a million followers, I failed, and so that part doesn't get shown. But I think parents today have gotten the message that it is totally up to them to control their children's emotions. And I think they've gotten the message that if they don't, their child is going to grow up to be this horribly needy person that is clearly going to have mental health issues and need lots and lots of therapy. And that's the wrong message. But again, I think it's an abreaction to lots of parents who feel like the baby boomers failed. I mean, they feel like they were raised horribly and they want to do the opposite. And I find that kind of reaction very upsetting as well, because I kind of feel like I gentle parented, with my kids way back when, before it was ever called gentle parenting. And I find it very upsetting that baby boomers across the board are getting this very bad rap that they, really ruined their kids.
Wondering if it's because we're viewing our kids' emotions in a different way. I think that we are not, I'm trying to think of how to say this. I think we're hypersensitive about everything. And I think we're hypersensitive about our kids' emotions. And then maybe looking back, we're hypersensitive about our own way our parents handled our emotions. I could be wrong, but I think the standard has risen, but it's not a healthy standard. I mean, I'm thinking about like Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff and the coddling of the American mind and, making kids more fragile by constantly catering to every emotion that they should be comfortable and happy.
Well, some of this really started when my kids were younger. And when they were in elementary school, every kid was a winner. Every kid got a
Mm,
trophy. You know, that's not reality. And I think there has to be a happy medium. I think kids have to develop
right.
resiliency. They're not going to develop resiliency if every single time they're upset, they're kind of coddled through it and everything is made better again. I mean, kids have to fail. They have to make mistakes. They have to learn what their limits are in order to grow and to be resilient. And I think gentle parenting doesn't, in the way most people are implementing it, doesn't allow for that. And that's really upsetting to me.
I agree. And I think it's because I'm wondering if that generation is not really the generation that had authoritarian parents, but the trophy generation. um,
That's absolutely true.
yeah.
My kids didn't have authoritarian parents,
Right.
but they did have the trophy parents.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
I think the problem is that if that parents are having a hard time tolerating their children's distress. And that's why I think that gentle parenting has turned into the unfortunate kind of parenting it is instead of what it's supposed to be. It is really supposed to be about teaching you how to regulate your own emotions so that you can model it to your kids. It really is supposed to be that way, in theory.
Yeah. But that's not what's happening. Well, let me rephrase it. I think it is happening, but to a limited extent, because no parent can be 100% even 100% of the time. We're human. There are things that are going to piss you off. There are things that are going to make you lose it. And I think that it's okay to, if that happens, you say to your kid, you apologize, you
Exactly.
show them that you're
Right.
human, and you say, I'm sorry I yelled about that. I was really stressed that we weren't going to get to the appointment on time and you weren't putting on your jacket. I wish I had asked you to start earlier so you wouldn't have felt rushed. Okay, that's a reasonable response to say to your kid and explain you're sorry you lost it. I think that's actually helpful, even because your kid sees that you're human. But I think it's wrong to try to sugarcoat everything and not show that something is frustrating you or not showing that something is making you angry, because then what happens if a kid feels frustrated or angry? Do they think there's something wrong with them because their mother never does that? That's wrong. They need to see how parents handle that. They learn from modeling. And I think
Exactly.
that if a parent loses their patience, loses their cool, that happens. And you just explain why it happened and how you could have handled it better. And that teaches your child.
Exactly. And that is part of the theoretical basis of responsive parenting or gentle parenting, whatever you want to call it. It's just somehow that message maybe is getting lost, or maybe it's just too hard in the moment. I think of, even back when I was raising kids, Parenting Magazine, I call it refrigerator door parenting, where you have to write down, say this, not that, don't take a job.
Hey, but they had some good articles.
They did. I loved it. But my point is that the idea that in the moment, you're not going to your refrigerator and saying, I have to say this, I can't say that. And I think maybe that's the problem with gentle parenting too, is because controlling your own emotions, tolerating your child's distress is one of the hardest things you will ever do.
Yeah, I think that's true. You want to make the world better for your child. You want them
Right.
to not suffer or feel pain, but you can't grow without that. You certainly can't develop resiliency without it.
Right. One of my theme songs is put your emotional oxygen mask on first. Get the help that you need
Yeah.
if you're struggling, and be honest with yourself that you're struggling. I think we have to be the perfect parent, and we can't say I'm struggling because it's not being modeled to us. Just the perfection is being modeled to us. Back to that
I think that's right.
standard. So yes, I think
Yeah.
we really agree on this. But I want to get to something positive. I think it's so positive. And I want to get to grandparents, and because I feel like grandparents are if you're lucky enough, if you're fortunate enough to have a living grandparents, and be a healthy relationship with them, they can be an incredible source of support, because we're talking about all the things that make it so hard to be a parent. What can we do to make it better? I definitely want to get more positive here, because one of my themes of my podcast is it takes a village to raise kids, build your village. And I think an important part of that village, should you have them, is grandparents. And by the way, I'm just putting a plug out here. I don't know if it's a thing. I've never seen it anywhere, but I still think that you can find potentially surrogate people to, neighbors or friends or other relatives.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't want people to think, well, this doesn't appear, because you yourself did not.
No, a village is a village wherever you find it.
Yeah, you didn't have, right, parents to be grandparents?
I didn't have it. My mother died when my first son was 6 weeks old.
Mm-hmm.
And I had very close friends. We were in a play group and we helped each other. I mean, that's how we got through, those early years.
But I think it's also helpful to have someone who's not your peer, because there's so much wisdom that someone our age brings to the table. Listen to us, please listen to us.
Yeah, I think we've lived a little longer.
I mean, I also, when I was trying to prepare for this talk, I couldn't find how to talk to your parent child about the grandchild when you have concerns. It's all about, how you have to tell the grandparent to step out. And I feel like there should be two separate parallel things here.
Now, I think it's very interesting because on Ask Bubby, I get asked this a lot when grandparents see something that they are very uncomfortable with, and they ask, how do they deal with it? How do they approach it? And I think that as grandparents, we are very vulnerable, because if our fear is if you overstep, you will somehow not be able to see your grandchild. Your grandchild will be withheld from you. So I don't think any grandparent wants to be in a position of fighting with the parent over how they raise their child. And as I've said many a time, it's their child, their rules. They get to make those decisions. But that doesn't mean as a grandparent, you don't have concerns or you can't raise them. I think it's all in how you do it. And I think it's really important, especially if it's around safety. If it's around something, let's say your grown child doesn't put their kid in a car seat. As a grandparent, how do you stay silent about that? That's dangerous. So I think it's very, very important how you approach your child. And I think you need to say, look, this is your child, and I know you get to make the decisions on how you want to raise them. But I would feel remiss as a grandparent if I didn't raise something that's concerning me. So I just want to raise it so that you know my concerns, and then it's up to you however you want to deal with that. And I think you say it, you express it, you've done your part, and then you really have to bite your tongue.
You model it with your own car seat that you buy. Make sure you have a good quality one yourself.
Right. And I think that you really have to stress to the parents that you're not disagreeing with their parenting overall, that you have a particular concern, you're raising it because you'd be remiss, and that's all you can do. I think you can raise it once, and either they listen or they don't. And I have to admit, I'm guilty. I have raised things more than once, but I think I can pull the pediatrician card. So I get a little, leeway from that. But there are things where after I've raised it, I have to just bite my tongue, and, they're going to do what they're going to do.
You're doing a good job as a grandparent when your tongue is completely bitten up into pieces.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It gets mangled on a daily basis.
But the flip side, how do parents handle it when the grandparents are meddling? Or doing something that they believe is dangerous? That comes up in your feed all the time.
I think there are really two sides to this. I think parents need to express very clearly what's important to them, especially about safety. They need to say, look, I know when I was little, you put me to sleep on my stomach. The studies today show that's really not safe. You have to put the baby down on their back, and you really can't put any pillows or blankets in the crib. Now, parents might not like that. I mean, grandparents might not like that. So if that's the case, show them a video I've done, show them an article, show them, a printout what the AAP says about safe sleep. I mean, if it's something about safety, you can show them what has changed. And I think it's very important that you explain the whys and tell them very clearly that's what you want them to do. Now, if a grandparent then absolutely, deviates from that on purpose, well, they've lost their rights. If a grandparent is going to insist on putting the baby down on their belly after you've told them not to, that grandparent's not going to be putting that baby down. I think those are some of the non-negotiable things when it comes to safety. But the flip side is if a parent is so adamant about controlling every single thing, and they hand the grandparents a 7-page document when they're babysitting for an hour about what they have to do and how they have to have, no more than half an ounce of water, and it has to be given between 10 and 10:15 or whatever it is. That's unreasonable for parents to expect that. It's also unreasonable for parents not to understand that grandparents have a very separate role with their grandkids. And if that means spoiling them by giving them an extra cookie, if that means giving them extra time if you're playing a game and, maybe they go to bed 15 minutes later, you know what? Those are things that bond a grandparent to a child. And those are actually things that should be really welcomed and overlooked. And it was interesting because a parent actually commented that when we had this discussion online, and they said that they think what makes the difference is the frequency. If the parent sees the child, if the grandparent sees the child once a week, or once a month, and they give an extra cookie, or give cookies for breakfast, that's not going to hurt the child. But if the grandparent sees the kid lots of times and undermines every rule that the parent has, that's not fair to the parent, and it's also not fair to the child. So I think that's right. I think you have to be sure that what you're asking, what a parent is asking of a grandparent is really, really necessary. And I think it's also a matter of how often is the grandparent going to deviate? Can you look the other way if it's just occasionally? Yeah, I think you can.
That is such a fantastic answer. And there are grandparents who care for the children, which is an amazing benefit, but that's when that comes
a very
up.
different.
Yeah.
That's a very different dynamic.
Yeah.
And I've said this online, if you are taking care of that child, you are doing it in a parenting role. Yeah. And that means you have to follow what the parents ask. And the one example that I always give, but only because it's so clear cut, is if the parents are raising the child as a vegetarian, whether you agree or not, you don't offer that kid a hamburger when they're visiting. That's a basic fundamental decision the parents made. And as a grandparent, you can't undermine that. But, if the parents say one cookie after dinner and you're seeing your child, it's once a week, and you say, okay, you can have a second cookie, that's not going to hurt anything.
That's true, but I think that's where you need to have collaborative conversations between the parent
Absolutely.
and the grandparent,
Yes.
because you're undermining it if they are super strict about sugar and they don't agree. But see,
I agree with you on that.
That same comments about tongue biting, you're being a good a daughter or son if your tongue is bitten up in millions of places. Yeah. Because you have to be able to be flexible too, where you can be. Right?
And I do think talking about it is important, because there may be a reason. The parents may think their child is very sensitive to sugar. And if you give that extra cookie, that kid's never going to go to bed that night. Right. And the parents, believe that and see it. Well, that's a very different scenario then. So I think you're right. You absolutely have to talk about it. But I think parents that get totally bent out of shape. I mean, I was once on a cruise and I had just started Ask Bubby. I mean, literally, I think 2 months earlier. And I'm on the cruise, and this grandmother was on the ship and found out that I was Ask Bubby. And she told me how her daughter in law absolutely put her in the doghouse, and there's nothing she can do to get out because the daughter-in-law was breastfeeding, went out for an hour, and left the child with her and didn't leave any milk. And the kid was so incredibly hungry and crying that she felt she had to do something. So she gave the child a bottle of water. The daughter in law went absolutely berserk. How dare she give water? And she tried explaining. She was crying. I tried everything. There was nothing I could do. And the daughter in law was so convinced that that really was going to hurt the child. That one bottle of water was not going to hurt the child. The grandmother did it in desperation, not because she believed that kid needed to be given a bottle of water all the time. And that's a case where, okay, you talk about it. And next time, the daughter in law can leave a bottle of pumped milk and the mother in law won't give water. But to have a war over that and not allow the grandmother to see the child, that's absurd.
No, and we discussed this before doing this talk, that I want to dedicate this talk to my father-in-law, who just recently passed away. And
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. He was a giant, and he's left a huge gaping hole in our lives. It was just very recent. And actually, the funeral was the day that I was originally supposed to interview you. So I thank you for being flexible with me. But I've been giving a lot of thought to the important role that grandparents play. And one of the things I want to talk about with you is, one of the things that came up, I told you, is should the great-granddaughters turning 8 and turning 10 come to the funeral? And I told you, my daughter asked me, the pediatrician, Dr. Bubby, right? Her Dr. Bubby. And I said, no. And I was wrong. And I'd like to give you a chance to talk about it, but I just want to say what happened in the end was my son-in-law is a rabbi. He was the rabbi for the funeral, and he got a second opinion from somebody not his mother-in-law. And he said, no, you should take them, but you should prepare them first. So that's what we did, and I'm really glad we did it, but it also shows the need to get somebody more objective in, even if you are a professional.
Yes.
So I want to give you a chance to talk about that, because part of having a relationship is also the difficult parts, right?
Yeah, I actually did some research on this as a resident, so it's kind of an interesting topic to me. The thing that I think is most overwhelming is that kids' imaginations are far worse than reality. So if they don't see that their grandparent died, they don't see the funeral, they don't see other people crying because that grandparent is gone, what they imagine went on or what's going on can be far worse in their minds. So, I mean, it clearly is age dependent, and parents know their kids best. Mature 5-year-old or 6-year-old may be able to handle it, and an immature 8-year-old may not be able to, but parents do know their children. And I think that you really want to be as honest with the child as possible, because their imaginations do run wild. And you also want to be very realistic in the wording that you use, because if you use euphemisms, oh, granddad went to sleep in the sky, something like that, the kids' imaginations, they think you go to sleep and all of a sudden you're going to end up in the sky, and they don't understand it. So you want to be as direct as possible, and you really want to equate it with something that maybe they can relate to. If they had a pet that died, even something as terrible as an insect died, so it didn't move again, people's bodies do that too. And granddad's body just wore out. And, so he died, and, we are burying him. However you say it, but the idea is to be as direct as possible, because what they will imagine is so much worse.
It's absolutely true. And I think people make the mistake of confusing, again, back to resilience and your own emotions, of not being able to tolerate their child's discomfort. And I want to give grace to people going through this, because when you're going through this, just like for me, right? My family, I think it's okay to say you don't have to be this perfect parent here and follow, what you've laid out so beautifully as the correct way to do it, is to be nice to yourself and give yourself grace and say, okay, I can't do this.
Yeah.
We'll get to it later. I'll talk with them later once I have been able to process my own emotions. That's okay. They don't necessarily have to be there. It's just if they are there, they should be prepared properly. Right?
I will tell you, tangentially to this, I remember when my son first asked about the birds and the bees, and he was in the bathroom and he asked me a question, and me, the pediatrician, totally fumbled. And all of a sudden I just went, Mark, and called for my husband. Well, by the time my husband was done, my son thought babies grew on trees.
Oh, no.
So I realized that he didn't do such a hot job either. And the next time it came up, I was very prepared and did it right. So, all of us fumble at times. And, you're right. Give yourself grace. You do the best you can under the circumstances.
Right. And when you get caught off guard, you can say, you know what? That's a really good question. I'm not ready to talk about, but I'm going to come back later and get to that question.
That's a phenomenal answer.
Yeah. And it's honest, but I think modeling to kids that we have emotions and,
absolutely.
and that we need to control, that we need to work on them. We're modeling it. That modeling is more than any set of words will ever do.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's very true.
So one more topic I want to get into, and then we could talk all day.
Two Jewish bubbies, yeah.
Two Jewish bubbies could schmooze. We were schmoozing before, we could schmooze after. But the one thing I want to also say is another thing that came up during this difficult time was the appreciation of how much our sets of grandparents, our parents, played while raising a child with special needs. And I literally went to my mother and my mother-in-law and said, thank you. You do not understand how you held us together. And so I want to share, that gives me a segue, a kind of abrupt segue, to share what this daughter with special needs said. She said to me, she loves these reborn dolls. They're like her baby. She collects them. And she also likes to watch videos of people who collect reborn. So she's watching this woman, and this woman lives far from her grandchild, which we never got into how you live far, and you're a model for how you could be distant grandparenting, but you could talk about that now in a minute if you want. And she said that this grandparent bought a doll to resemble her grandchild who she lived far from. And my daughter says, why didn't she just spend the same money on a plane ticket?
Well, I had spent money on tons of plane tickets and then carried it to the nth degree and just bought a house 3 blocks from where my grandson is. So I will definitely be bi-coastal. I think grandparents play such a special role. And I was very sad that I never got to see my mother be a grandmother to my children. And I think, grandparenting is just the most special thing in the entire world. And I wouldn't miss one day if I can avoid it, of being with my grandson. So I think your daughter was very wise because, quite honestly, if I couldn't afford a home and if I couldn't afford the flights, I would be Zooming or FaceTiming a million times a week, and I would be scrounging up all of my pennies so that I could make that trip. And I just think grandparents are really important, and grandchildren are just the most wonderful thing in the entire world.
They really are. And you reminded me about the Zooming and FaceTiming or WhatsApp video, which is also a good option. It's really, really a great way
It has changed grandparenting.
Right. I think COVID, that was one rare good thing that came out of COVID. And I just want to tell one cute story. One cute story, then we really have to go. And that's my mother is Gigi. Okay. By the way, in Bubby, a great grandmother is the Alta Bubby, the old Bubby. And my mother said, oh, that'd be the Alta Bubby. I'm going to be Gigi for great grandma. So she's Gigi, and she built such a relationship because unfortunately we don't live as far as you, but not close enough. And when you're older, it's, you're less mobile. And so she built such a relationship just from these FaceTiming that I was with my grandson, Max, and he was eating dinner and he didn't want to talk to me. He needed to have his Gigi on a screen while he ate. We didn't even talk about screens and the downside of screens, but It is not screen time when you're talking to your grandparents.
It's not. It absolutely is not.
It really, really isn't. So however you make that relationship, don't underestimate even FaceTiming or WhatsApp or videoing or whatever. You can build a very strong relationship here. He wanted her more than me in the flesh.
Yeah, but that's actually another case where it's really just as dependent on the parents as the grandparents. And I think both sides really need to work together to make that relationship happen.
I agree. And we really have to move on. So I want to thank you so much. If you want, you can tell us where to find you, although I think you're easy to find.
Well, I'm under Ask Bubby, Bubbie, on both Instagram and TikTok. Actually, Threads as well now. And Facebook has some stuff as well. But I would love to hear from everybody and to have people join the community that we've developed.
I love your people, by the way. So it is a
I
great,
do too.
It is a great positive thing. We should make the algorithm tilt more in your direction. So I thank you.
Well, thank you
so much.
No, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Kids Matter. Raising healthy, happy children takes a village, and I'm grateful you're part of ours. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share this episode with another parent, grandparent, teacher, or anyone who cares about kids. Together, we can build the supportive community our children deserve. I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future topics at kidsmatterpodcast@gmail.com with no exclamation point. Your voice truly matters. Until next time, keep advocating for the children in your life because kids really do matter. They are our future. I'm Dr. Elisa Minkin, and this has been Kids Matter. Please note that while I am a pediatrician, I am not your child's pediatrician. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. For any medical concerns or decisions, please reach out to your child's healthcare professional.